everyone, welcome back to Shutter Magazine. I'm Dustin Lucas, and today we're going to be wrapping up my 7-part series on how to step up your Lightroom game. So in this final article, I'm going to be talking about life after Lightroom, right? So we're in the final stretch for delivering our files. We're ready to get these up to our clients, start making some post-event sales. Feels good, right? To be almost done. So what's next? So I'm going to go through a few things which are really important about some of these things that you want to do, finalizing your files, of course, in Lightroom, but also some things, life after Lightroom, right? So soft proofing is a really awesome feature in order to get your files prepped and ready, either for print or for taking them into Photoshop. I'm going to show you how to use different paper profiles for printing, but also different soft proofing techniques to really get your images looking good on screen, but ready for your output, whether that's further editing, more printing, things like that. We'll go through the print module a little bit to show you some features on how you can print directly from Lightroom. I'm also going to go through some basic retouching. Again, in Lightroom, I have touched on this a bit, but just some basic things you want to do with some skin smoothing and some blemish removal, and showing you how you can do that, and then taking your file directly into Photoshop, saving it back in, and using soft proofing, right? So it's a soft proofing workflow to make sure the editing and the way that it's going to output all kind of works. So I'll show you those steps as well. Automation scripts in Photoshop are really important. I like to add additional sharpening, or I like to use different creative actions or skin smoothing. That's something I like to automatically apply my actions. So there's different automation scripts like image processor or automation batch. In case you weren't using droplets like we've used in the past. So if you've already exported your files and you haven't applied an action, or maybe you have, and you want to apply another action to your images, well, you can. There's automation scripts that you can use in Photoshop. We'll go through those. And then some of the final stuff we're going to talk about is archiving your files, right? Data integrity seems to be the most neglected part of a lot of photographers' workflow. Storing files and archiving. It lives on a hard drive until you deliver it to a client, but then you drop your hard drive on the ground and your RAWs are gone. You send it off to your data recovery center or your hard drive company, hoping and praying, paying thousands of dollars. Don't be stupid. Back up your work at the beginning and archive your work correctly when it's delivered. So let's jump right into soft proofing and calibration monitor, things like that to get started. All right, so now that we're ready to move into soft proofing, things like screen calibration, monitor calibration, color management, all that stuff becomes very important. So you always want to make sure you're working in some sort of a calibrated environment, right? So in your Apple settings or on your PC settings, you just want to make sure you're not working on your standard kind of blue tinted or uncalibrated profile. You want to make sure to use some sort of software to get your screen calibrated at some level, so that way you're seeing true colors on your screen, but also when you send them off to your lab, you always kind of want to make sure that you're dialed into those settings, right? So your clients might be looking at their images on their phone, they might be looking at them on an iPad. Who knows where they're going to see these images? And of course, if they're looking at them through a browser, right, you have now third-party color management. How do you keep control of those things? So I always recommend start simple, get a calibration device, a physical color spectrometer that you're going to have sitting on your monitor. You're going to be working in a room that the light's pretty consistent. It's a good place to start. Now, having said that, I will oftentimes export images, look at them on my phone, because I know my phone's super bright. Whether you're using an iPhone or an Android, it always kind of helps to make sure the colors don't look too funky on there. But you just want to keep those things in mind where your clients are going to be looking at these images when they have them. If they have digitals or have the ability to look at proofs, control the color, definitely calibrate your monitor. Now, color management becomes very important in multiple aspects in Lightroom, right? So we're viewing this image in a completely different color space than you might be exporting it out of Lightroom. So you want to make sure when you're going into those settings for file settings, I typically, if I'm going to be doing further edits, I'll use TIFF as an export format, and the Adobe 98. It's pretty standard for editing. You know, I don't typically use ProPhoto RGB. And sRGB is something if I'm done editing, I want to send it, either putting it online or off to my lab. I definitely want to keep it there. Bit depth, you know, that's up for debate. Usually I'm at 16-bit if I'm going to be taking it into Photoshop, just so I can have the most amount of depth and color. If I'm doing massive manipulations, kind of helps with banding and things like that. But 8-bit is perfectly fine as well. All just kind of depends on what your computer can handle. But that's one option, right? So when we're looking at these images, they're raw. They don't have a color profile assigned, but we're kind of seeing one assigned to it in Lightroom in the preview that we're looking at right now. But when you output it, it becomes very important for color management. Same way when you do the edit in feature, right? So when you're doing external editing, you want to make sure to choose those different settings as well. I typically use Adobe 98, 16-bit, 300. All this stuff right here is typically where I set it. If you're going to use an external editor, of course you can change all those things as well. But this is an important part of the workflow to make sure you have those settings right. So getting back to soft proofing, while you're in the develop module, we hit the S key. What that does is that opens up into a soft proof preview, right? So we can click on the matte here to choose different options, right? You can see the gray, what you normally kind of see, but it makes sense to see paper white here. I'm going to hide my info just so I can see this image more fully. And what we can do is we can start to look at the before and after, right? So here's before, here's after. So this is our edit for the most part. So as you're going to notice here, our default settings are kind of all set up to where sRGB is the profile we're looking at. We can look at Adobe 98. Doesn't really change too much. Now, where you start to get really interesting options here are where you can install paper profiles. Now, if you're not printing yourself, you might think, well, that's not really that important to me. But from your lab, you might be able to download an ICC profile so that way you can soft proof on your end. What that means is, and like a hard proof is something, hey, I'm going to print it out, I'm going to look at it, I have a hard proof, right? It's a tangible thing. But with soft proofing, it's kind of like a preliminary way to see what the image is going to look like for output. Now, on screen to print, always two different kind of conversations. Usually on screen it's a little bit brighter than the print will be, but this gives us kind of an idea of what different papers would look like. So if I want to make sure that I install these different paper profiles, you'll see that in library, all of my paper profiles are already listed. I can check mark any of these ones that I want to be installed. But in the case that I don't have that set up, I can go into my applications folder and go to color sync, which is in utilities. And this is where I can make sure that my profiles are already installed. So you can add profiles and things like that, but this gives you the option to show you on your system which profiles you have. These are all the display profiles, but all of my paper profiles are installed here. Super important, right? So installing those, if you're on a PC, and especially if you're on a Mac as well, there might be different ways that when you go to your third party, like your Canon website, your Hahnemühle, different Ilford, different paper companies that you're purchasing paper from, you can get their ICC profiles downloaded on their website and installed, and they'll have all those directions there. But for here, what I want to do is I kind of want to see what it would look like on a fine art paper. And you see how quickly my image shifts, right? So from sort of the before and after, here is the edit and edit not, back and forth, and I can kind of see between sRGB and the fine art, a little bit of a change, kind of mutes and opens up the shadows here, but simulating the paper and ink is a really interesting feature to kind of make my image look a little more flat than it is. So it gives you that opportunity to kind of see what it's going to look like at print. Now, if you want to start adjusting your image because of how that matte sort of preview looks, now as soon as we start adjusting, it's going to ask us if we want to make a proof copy or if we want to make this the proof or undo, right? So it's already asking if we want to make changes, right? So we can create a proof copy, so that way it's actually making a separate copy of these settings. Again, it's a soft proofing copy. So this is something that we're going to test out maybe for printing or further editing in Photoshop, but just kind of want to show you how you can get a little more dialed in on what the final output's going to look like. So a few things that I like to apply as well is if I hold Shift and hit the S key, it's going to turn my gamut warning on. So it's automatically going to be basing that on what output I'm using. As you see, if I change to sRGB, this highlighted red sort of gamut warning um, becomes a lot more limited and just is really reduced here. So with the fine art, it already knows what output I need, and it's showing that it's going to have problems printing that. So it's either going to be blocked up, which likely is what's going on here in all the shadows. So I have some options here. So I can leave that on, and I can put my blacks back to 0. I can lift my shadows. I can do whatever I need to, even lift the black point to kind of fix that, right? So now that I've done that, you've kind of lost the tonality in my image, but it can kind of show you, how to limit some of that stuff. Now, I'm not really having any issues on any of my highlights, so that's not really a problem. But that black ink is what's going to kind of show you, where the best place to go with your edit. So that's with the gamut warning turning on. With destination, now you have one for your monitor, which really isn't too useful. I'm not seeing any problems or anything popping up with that. So we can go ahead and just kind of turn that off. But it's nice to have the output gamut warning. That's definitely helpful as well. So looking at the difference between the simulate paper and ink option, turn on and off, that's super helpful, as well as like the proof copy. If I want to make another one, I can make as many copies as I need to in this specific setting. So if I want to get out of that module, I just click off just hit S. That's how we can toggle to go back and forth and make different changes and things like that. So what's great is I can create multiple copies of my image as I have here, just to kind of compare different outputs. So it's pretty great that you can do different options for soft proofing. So moving into the print module, let's jump in to see our different options and how to apply ICC profiles there as well. All right, so just like in our different options here at the top for library and develop, we have our print module that we can use. And what's pretty cool about this is that we can set, a lot of the same settings that you have specifically like in Photoshop when you're printing, a lot of the same, abilities to print for print resolution, print sharpening, 16-bit output, and you can change, you can actually manage the color in Lightroom, which is a really useful feature when you want to set what the specific profile is versus just letting the printer choose what it wants. But you can make sure that the fine art paper, if that's what you're using, that's the profile for color management, as well as perceptual versus relative. And you can even make some pre-printing options and changes and things like that as well in this module. So, kind of going over these different options and templates and things like that in printing. I typically use the Canon Print Studio software, which works really well for Canon paper. But of course, if you're using third-party papers and things like that, and you don't want to take an image into Photoshop and you want to print directly out of Lightroom, this gives you that pretty simple ability. And you have like your different things that you can apply on here, like watermarks and guides and layout, image settings, and things like that. So quite a few options for printing out of Lightroom and just kind of running through this module. Let's jump into the retouching aspect to show you real quick how I use the adjustment brush, do some spot removal in Lightroom, and then take the images into Photoshop to take them a step further. So now to jump into some basic retouching in Lightroom, I like to take the image and do as much adjusting as I can in Lightroom just because it's fast. And my adjustment brush makes it super simple for me to be non-destructive and not store a whole bunch of editing data, right? There's nothing more annoying than having these large bloated PSD or TIFF files stored on your computer for like these edits that you might go back to and adjust. So I really like to have that in Lightroom as it saves storage space. So for something like this, I can handle most of it in Lightroom as I've done here, removing some of the veins and some of these spots on the eyes, just to kind of toggle between here to get me there, as well as softening the skin just a bit quite quickly in Lightroom. So jumping into the adjustment brush tool, I'm gonna need to kind of zoom in to 1 to 1 in order to really get zoomed in on the skin here, and fix some of these things, right? So in some areas I'm going to have to use the spot removal brush. In the other areas I'm going to have to use the skin softening brush. So what I like to do is turn on the auto mask feature for skin softening, and I've already created a skin softening too. As you can see, my effects preset, which is very important, right? If I want to get to a quick effect and save that preset, I can. Once I have my slider settings dialed in here, I can save the effect as a preset to refer to later. So that's super helpful and keeps me efficient in Lightroom. So in doing that, you have your different options here that you can use for skin softening. Same for different like dodge and burn techniques. So when I choose my effects preset, I can just zoom in and start painting on the entire part of the face. Now remember, we have auto mask selected, so what that's going to do is it's going to mask out some of those edges it automatically thinks we don't want to keep. So I'm going to go ahead and paint on the entire face, and just to see where my mask is going, I can hit the O key, and it's going to apply green everywhere to all the spots that it's painting. As you can see, it's not doing too good of a job masking out the eyes and the face. So it hasn't done a very good of a job. Looking at the range mask, we can do color and maybe get lucky and just have it quickly. There we go. Right? So you want to talk about efficiency and understanding the limitations of Lightroom and understanding the tools. Where the skin color is something that you want to grab, and you might still have a little bit of work to do here in the shadow. That's not a problem. We can always add that in with the brush. But you have the ability to use the range mask. You can turn this up to where it'll add on a little bit more. But I mean, that's how quick it can be. You can paint the entire face. Now, of course, we want to do her neck as well, but it's a little blurry down there. So, it quickly just masks out the face. Masks out the hair, the eyebrows, the eyes, the lips. Very important parts that we want to keep masked out. Maybe even underneath the nose, we want to mask out as well. So, let's move on to some of our effects. So I can hit the O key. That'll turn off my mask. And if I want to paint some more, I can. We'll go back to my brush, click real quick here, and make sure that we're painting in these areas as well. And if I want to hit my O key, turn off auto mask, it's going to let me paint in some of those areas as well. So real quickly, that's how we can take care of just getting the face, applying our effect, and then I'll go ahead and hit the O key, and now I can start tweaking to make sure as I zoom in this isn't too soft. So real quick, it just does a really nice effect of making the skin softer but still keeping these pores, and it sharpens. We can even add a little more sharpening if we want to fix some of that as well. So I'm pretty happy with that overall. That's a pretty quick adjustment um, to get that looking good. Now, where I want to take that a step further is if I want to come in and I want to paint out some of these hot spots and things like that. I can come in with a new brush, and if I want to use another skin softening or fill, I can come in here and do like a highlights, bring my highlights down and just paint over that area. Now that helps for sure, but if we want to add some color as well, we can. Come in here. If I want to add a specific kind of skin tone, turn that down, turn it all the way down, just to see if adding a little bit will help. So it's not just a white, removal. It's actually filling in with color a little bit. And you might want to like darken that up a little bit and probably make our brush a little bit smaller here. But if we wanted to fix that, we can kind of come in here and mess with the highlights a little bit, maybe even the whites. And we can increase our saturation. Don't want to go too much, way too much. But that's something we can add to bring in some color to kind of help, you know, quite quickly on the skin. And we can kind of see before and after. Just a quick fix, probably still a little too heavy on the saturation, but turn that down a little bit and highlights. So looking into the spot removal tool, this is a perfect place where I can remove some of the issues here on, if I want to come in and paint this here as well. Really kind of help to quick blend that in. So if I wanted to come in here and remove some things as well, I can hit the Q key, and that's going to open up my heal and clone tool here for spot removal. So if I want to quickly, I'm just kind of changing the size of this. I'm on heal right now. I'm going to see if I can just get a decent sample to get rid of that altogether. So it seems like it did a pretty good job to remove that vein. And we can do the same thing right over here. There and there. Nope, that doesn't look good. We always want to make sure we're, yeah, that's not looking good at all there. Make sure that we're not changing everything too much. But if we use the face, it's not necessarily what I want. So that might require a little more work, maybe something we do in Photoshop as well. But that's kind of, in finding a good spot to use for the eye veins and things like that. And the same thing goes for the hair. Like if I want to kind of just quickly remove those things, I can kind of see on and off here how that's looking. Let's see. Always visual spots, and something that really helps us, especially with pimples, is going to be turning the visual spots on. Just kind of coming here and grabbing, looking for those spots for the face. Toggling that on and off can really help in finding blemishes, right? So as you have these like little dots on the face, they also show up as pores, so you just got to be careful with what you're removing. But something like this, and kind of sticking out a little more obvious, we want to fix that. It can help. Same thing with dust spots. If you have dust spots on your image sensor, to remove that kind of stuff. So coming in here and just doing some real quick edits on the retouching side, using the spot removal can be super helpful as well. But now I want to take this image and I want to edit in Photoshop to do a little bit further work, right? Like if I want to come in and do maybe a little more work on the hair, like for instance, if our brush here isn't doing the best job for removing the hair, that seemed to do okay. You have the pretty decent hair coming across the eyebrow here. Did an okay job. There's still hair up here, and this seems to be blended okay. It seems like I cut some of the eyebrow off, but I can come in here and fix a lot of this with the spot removal tool. So zooming out, of course, we can take this image and open it up into Photoshop. So if I want to do that, I can hit the, let's see here, let's zoom back, Command E, and it's going to open this up as a copy. It's going to make a TIFF of this to open it up into Photoshop. So now, I'm waiting for this to open up over here. It's still loading down here at the bottom. Automatically opens us up here. So if I want to apply some of my workflow actions and apply this quickly to the image, or if I have a different kind of creative style that I want to apply, if I want to duplicate my background layer, always want to make a copy. Go ahead and apply this on top. Pretty heavy-handed. Maybe I just want to turn that down a little bit. Sure. Warmth is a little heavy for me. So I can quickly apply some of my creative actions. I can also do something. I like to do dodge and burn in our in Photoshop. So something becomes a little easier for me to do as well. And if I want to throw on, oh, I don't know, some sharpening, I can do that as well. So if I want to do just a quick high pass output sharpening, I can do that. So here we have our dodge and burn. Quickly, if I want to come in here and kind of soften this up a little bit in here, I can. Burning down, of course, we got some highlights and things like that that we want to fix. Let's see here, I usually have a white recovery. Just kind of come in and bring in some of those highlights just to make sure all of our attention is on the face here. Everything else looks pretty good. Spots wise, probably darken the background a little bit. Wouldn't be a bad idea to fix all of these hairs, these flyaway hairs as well. So all that kind of stuff I definitely want to take care of here in Photoshop. But just to kind of show real quick, saving this out, it's going to save my layers back into Lightroom. So I still have a non-destructive edit, but it's going to save this TIFF file. It's going to be much larger. I'll go ahead and quit that, and it's automatically going to open up. I have my TIFF file that I can now use that I just finished editing. So if I want to edit this again, I can edit on original or make another copy. But since I didn't make any adjustments in Lightroom, I can open up the original and it's going to give me all of my layers back. Pretty simple to do, right? So if I want to come back in here and make some more changes, maybe I want to turn this down a bit more. Sure. And if I want to apply another skin softening layer, I can. Oh, or not. Just that layer just to add a little more. A little more softness. And I have my high pass up here as well, just to kind of see that sharpness. Now it helps to come look at 1:1, of course, but kind of where we're at um, from a here to here. Not bad with a few actions and brushwork, so might be a little orange now. Not real big fan of the color that's going on, so maybe we just turn that down as a whole. So that looks pretty good. So we can we'll save that, and once that's done, you can either quit Photoshop or we can just close the file. I'll go ahead and quit Photoshop for now. And now we have our file back up. That's our TIFF from there to there, right? Not a bad adjustment. So let's jump into the automation tasks in Photoshop. In case you already exported your files, you want to apply some actions automatically to a batch of images. Let's talk about how you can do that. All right, so now we're ready to talk about automation in Photoshop. So many of you might be familiar with a few of these options, but there's the automate batch, which basically means that it's going to overwrite your image. So if you want to apply an action to the exported JPEG and you don't want two versions, batch is a great option for you. There is an option in there to save a duplicate, but it doesn't work as well if you're wanting to save a copy. I like to use the script image processor if I want to save a copy, so I can assign color space, I can change the file type, JPEG, TIFF, PSD. I can also run actions as well. So in both of these, the importance of the scripts or the automation is that you can apply action to a large number of images automatically in Photoshop. So jumping into the batch option, remember, this is going to overwrite your image. So if you have JPEGs that you want to apply skin softening to, and you don't want a skin softened version and just the color corrected JPEG without the skin softening, this is the perfect option for you. Batch is super quick and runs pretty well without errors and things like that. So you can come in here and choose which specific set and action you want to apply. So if I want to do portraiture, or what I really like to do is use skin softening and sharpen. As you saw earlier, when I apply portraiture and a high pass sharpening on top of it, it sharpens those edges. So the details like the dress and the textures of the skin, the eyes, the lips, the hair, all that stuff gets sharper, even though the skin softening, which the portraiture is going to kind of find things that match the color of the skin. So sometimes the hair and details on the dress can become softened. Sharpening those on top can fix some of those softening issues. So I like to use a skin softening and sharpen action that I built. So for the source, you can have open files, images from Bridge, things like that, or you can just choose a folder that you've already created. So if I have images that I'm ready to go and I have my export, I can choose all of the images I've already exported, my digital negatives and things like that. So those are those JPEGs that I want to use. So remember, this only works for files that you've already exported out of Lightroom. Like before, when we're exporting out of Lightroom and you want to apply a script, you can use a droplet. That's much different. We talked about that in the previous article on how you can apply actions when you export images out of Lightroom. So this is going to be specifically for when we've already exported and we want to apply an action later. So we've chosen our action, the files, destination none. Now this is a dangerous step here because if you click none and if your action doesn't include saving and closing, then it's going to open up every one of your files. So if you run a batch of 1,000 images and they open up into Photoshop, it'll likely crash your computer or it'll just freeze up. So you want to make sure to choose save and close just to be safe. So if your batch process is creating layers and you don't have a flatten step in your action, this might prompt you to save as, so you can override that. and just choose for that to go ahead and overwrite any save as commands. So it just saves the JPEG and closes it. So that's an important part too. So this is going to automatically do JPEGs as well. So if you're exporting on a JPEG and applying layers, it's going to flatten that. So JPEG's the best thing to use. I definitely recommend using image processor if you're coming from a TIFF file, like a bunch of TIFFs or PSDs that you exported. Most people, they export JPEGs out of Lightroom, so this is a perfectly good feature for that. But that's basically how batch is going to work. Jumping into image processor, which I find to be more useful to create copies, and it's a little more of a fail-safe. So if your action screws something up or corrupts your files, it actually does it to the copy rather than overwriting that file and causing an error. So you can choose the folder, or if you have opened images, you can do that as well. That wouldn't really be the case if you have 1,000 images. You wouldn't have them open in Lightroom, or excuse me, in Photoshop. So you can choose a folder of images here. And then you can choose the location of where you want them to save. But here are your different settings, which are interesting. So you can choose file type, and you can choose to convert to sRGB. So earlier when we were working on TIFF files, or if you were exporting in Adobe 98 because you weren't sure what color space you want to go to, now you can convert them to sRGB, which is pretty awesome. You can also choose the quality of the JPEG. So if you want them to be like a medium, you can choose for them to be 8 or 12. So you can definitely assign the quality or the size of the JPEGs, which is pretty good. So moving on to PSD or TIFF, something that I find to be very useful is if I want to save a bunch of files as TIFFs instead of JPEGs, but I don't want layers to be saved, whether there are layers or not, I can choose to apply my flatten image, my flatten and save option. And remember, what this is going to do is it's going to, I don't think I have another flatten option, but what it's going to do is it's going to save a copy. It's going to choose where it's coming from and where this copy of this file is going to go. So when you do this, you can keep your layered TIFF files separate from your flattened ones. But if you need to save as a TIFF file, you can. You can choose to resize and also your compression options. So it becomes really useful if you want to flatten a bunch of creative files at once and save them as a new copy. So versus just doing an export one at a time. So if you have a bunch of images you've edited in Photoshop, I find this image processor to be super helpful when you want to get some output files back to them. So you can do flatten and save, different workflow options as well. You can apply the skin soften and sharpen. That works as well. So very awesome, very good feature to use. But those are the differences between batch automation and image processor. All right, so here we are. We have all of our files saved. We've used Photoshop to apply our actions. Our files are ready to be delivered. We've either done our IPS, we're ready to order products. Now what do we do with those files, right? So in steps archival. This is like storing your files, probably the most neglected part of most photographers' workflow. I mean, data integrity is like a 101 thing. You always do it, and it's got to be the most important part, right? You have the assets, you have all the content. You want to be safe with those things. You don't want to lose those files. So it's very important what you do with those, right? So when you're storing the files, you want to save it in multiple places, right? There's like the 3-2-1 technique, right? Or the 2-1 technique, 2 local, 1 cloud. Or 2 on-site, 1 off-site, right? Well, however you want to look at that. But local storage is cheap. Cloud storage is, depending on how you use it, can be, Dropbox, Amazon Photos. You have Backblaze. You have all these different cloud options to store your files. There's the Adobe Creative Cloud. I mean, there's cheap, there's fast, storage solutions, but when it comes down to it, you really just got to set a plan and stick with it, right? Everybody has their opinion in this, but if you're not really sure what to do, I think the safe thing is to store all of your renamed RAW and JPEG files locally for a year. Just hold on to those files for a year. You might have a situation where the couple gets married and a relative recently becomes deceased, and they want one of those files from the reception or one of those group shots that maybe didn't make it into the album or they didn't order a print. and they want to do something special with it. So hold on to those RAWs. There's no reason to toss them out, even the unselected ones, because there might be something that they didn't care about at the time, and now that image becomes very important to them. Um, you and being able to provide a service, but just a good experience holding onto those files. I wouldn't necessarily just say trash them, right? Local storage is cheap. Get an external hard drive, store stuff on them, put it in a safe, put it downstairs. Set a timer. Year later, you can dump all the unselected stuff. I typically post the renamed, edited JPEGs in full resolution or medium resolution online cloud. Just in case I need to have access to them or the client loses their files, I can quickly share that folder with them. So if they reach out to me, I don't have to go and find it on a local hard drive and then send it to them. It can be super quick for me to reshare that folder with them in the future. But it's not something like, it's not my responsibility to hold on to their images. It's just part of good service, right? So that's something, that's just some advice that I have. Holding on to your RAWs for a year. And then you can dump them, right? You don't need to hold on to them forever. Now, some of you out there might have a bank safe where every RAW you have is stored and saved forever. Perfectly fine to do as well. Again, it's all whatever you want to do. But if you don't have a plan, it's good to start somewhere. Talk with different photographers, see what they do. But I definitely recommend an end-all be-all is a great solution to have edited JPEGs that are renamed correctly, posted on a cloud site. So it's simple and fast to share, and you have them accessible as well. So in case something happens to your local storage, you don't lose your archive or your portfolio of work. They live in the cloud. That's super important to remember. So any of those kind of things, any questions you have, you can always reach out with that. I do a lot of articles on storage and data integrity. Again, it's the most neglected part of the workflow. And that's the last step, right? Archiving, local storage is cheap. It doesn't hurt to save things on multiple drives. For those of you out there that have external hard drives connected to your laptop that's sitting on the couch next to you, that thing's going to fall on the ground. You're going to lose files. Like, just be smart, invest in storage, have multiple backups locally, get the files to your client, and then store them long term. That's all I'm saying. So now we're ready for the results and the final wrap up. All right, we finally made it. Now that everything's been edited, delivered, and archived, it's time to rinse and repeat, right? Let's do the next wedding, right? So now that we've successfully completed a wedding, gone through my 7-part series, this concludes the how to step up your Lightroom game, right? So it's all about challenging yourself to learn and always improve, right? I use words like efficiency, speed, quality in Lightroom. I mean, Lightroom's a great tool, but you can always figure out ways to save yourself time and increase quality, right? You can be super fast at editing and be sloppy, but that's not the goal, right? But Lightroom is a really good tool to kind of let those two things meet, right? You don't need to spend 20 hours color correcting and editing a job. I mean, that level of editing, I'm hoping you're getting paid for it, right? If that's a $20,000 wedding that you're editing for and doing product, great. Yeah, spend 20, 30 hours of editing, but by God, like you just, that kind of time to be spent is just insane. I mean, you want to give the time that's needed for the images, but at the same time, edit, get the images, show them to your client, get them to pay more, order images, and then spend your time, invest in those images. That kind of stuff makes sense. So I'm hoping through this, this series, you've really you've taken some things down, you've learned some things, brushed up on some new techniques, or maybe some things that I'm doing are a little outdated for you or don't make sense for your business. That's okay, right? It's just to give you kind of a game plan and give yourself kind of a way to kind of compare what you're doing. Is there a better way to do it? Are you already doing the best way? You need to do that. You need to spend the time and always find what works best for you. I can't stress that enough. So I hope this series will help you step up your game next year. And yeah, I'll see you guys in 2020.